everyone, and welcome to Real Life Talks. I'm your host, Yvonne Heath, author of the book Love Your Life to Death and founder of the I Just Showed Up movement. So joining me today is the lovely Natalie Harris, and I don't even know where to start, Natalie, because you have so many amazing things to share.
Thank you.
I'm so happy you're here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yes. So we have been trying to connect for a while now. I think it was a year and a half ago. I had Mindy Piva,
yes,
our lovely mutual friend,
love her,
on my show.
Yes.
She is a beautiful, wonderful soul,
Yeah.
and her husband Chris as well.
Yes,
hello, Chris. You're wonderful too.
That's awesome.
And we were talking about her journey with PTSD.
Right.
And she's one of the people who said, you have to connect with Natalie Harris, which I've heard, I don't know, for 5 different people. So now I'm so glad we're here.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk about, well, not everyone knows what PTSD is, so I think that's probably a good place to start, and your journey with that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, PTSD, the Coles Notes version of it is it affects your brain physiologically. So 3 parts of your brain at once been exposed to a great amount of trauma, or even a trauma, one trauma that's a large trauma. It affects our prefrontal cortex, it's called your hippocampus, and your amygdala.
Your brain, all
your
these
brain.
different parts of your brain.
Yes. Parts of your brain that make you, symptoms are memory, irritability, nightmares, night terrors. We can't really store short-term memory into long-term memory very well, and it's a dark, dark world when you're in it. And the sad part about PTSD is a lot of people that I've met, and myself as well, we use ways to hopefully try to cope with those symptoms, and they're not usually the best. Healthy
ways, yeah. So what does PTSD stand for?
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right, so post-traumatic stress disorder. Many people have heard, oh yes, PTSD, and I think sometimes it kind of becomes a buzzword, and oh yes, we've heard about that, but I think we are now truly starting to really understand the tremendous impact mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of it, right? It affects all of it. And we are now, thank goodness, as a society, recognizing this isn't, well, if people say it's all in your mind, well,
it's in our minds.
Yes, it is in our minds.
That's true.
That doesn't mean it's not real.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
It's very real. So, Natalie, what was your journey? You were a paramedic?
I was a paramedic for 11 years in the county of Simcoe, and I loved my career, every second of it. I was so happy when I finally got hired, and it was a long journey even getting to that position.
Yes.
And I was so honored to be able to help people in my community. And slowly over time, I noticed that certain calls would linger with me longer, usually if it's something to do with a child. And that obviously is a difficult call for anyone. It doesn't matter. But I wasn't taught how to process my emotions, and I wasn't taught how to move in a healthy way through that grief that I would have with those calls. So I started drinking a lot to try to cover those feelings and the pain that I felt.
It's so painful.
It's so painful.
It doesn't feel bearable, tolerable.
Exactly. And I didn't say anything about it because I thought if I talk about it, all my colleagues will think that I'm weak. You know, I thought we didn't learn very much about PTSD in school. We learned a little bit about, well, you might have a patient who has PTSD, but it wasn't really talked about that we were exposed to trauma and could have it as well. And then in 2012, I was one of the main paramedics at the Travelodge double murders in Barrie. And the murderer was my patient. So
I just have chills.
Yeah. We didn't know he was the murderer at first, but as we were transporting him to the hospital, because he had wounds himself, he started talking, and basically we put 2 and 2 together, and the police officer charged him right there in the back of the ambulance with 2 counts of homicide.
Wow.
And I thought, you know, it was just going to be a bad call that I will move through and carry on with my career. But over the next 2 years, up until the trial in 2014, the call was 2012, the trial was 2014, I suffered what is called a moral injury. So yeah, everything in the world turned so dark to me because I was looking into the eyes of a human being that could you know, premeditate and consciously harm these women the way he did. everything else up until excuse me, up until then was an accident.
Yes, yes, of course.
Right.
No one meant to. The
Exactly.
car accident.
Yeah. So
okay.
it was, you know, horrible as well, but it was an accident. So I spiraled into a huge, deep depression, and my alcohol drinking just went out of control. My family was really noticing that I was hurting, but I was in denial. I didn't want to talk at all about having, you know, possibly being sick. There was I had a wall of self-stigma around me.
Why aren't I coping? Why
right.
How come other people can, and why am I not dealing with this better?
Exactly. And my world was falling apart. And the day I testified in 2014, I came home and I had to go to a memorial for a friend who died by suicide.
Oh my goodness.
So it was a bad day, and I couldn't, it was the tipping point. I couldn't bear it anymore, and I overdosed that night.
Oh my goodness.
So that was the beginning of my recovery journey, though. So it was a horrible time. CAS was involved with my son. I needed intensive treatment and therapy, but it put me on the path finally that I needed to get the help that I deserved, and all first responders and people, everyone deserves. And I'm just so blessed now that after all the treatment that I've done and inpatient, outpatient programs, I'm totally at the part where I feel I'm in post-traumatic growth.
Right.
So it's really profound.
So it's so hard for me not to hug you right now because seriously, so many things that you just said are so important. First of all, when we turned to alcohol, I shared many times as a nurse. I had a love affair with red wine for many years. When chemotherapy, chemo patients would die and their families were distraught. I went home and I called, get the wine ready, and because it's so painful and you feel like you're supposed to just tolerate it or be able to handle it, and you hit rock bottom, and like it was like your brain could no longer cope with everything going on.
Exactly.
And that doesn't make you a weak person.
Not at
that
all.
makes you a human being.
Right.
Like,
that's it.
A human being. So that rock bottom was your springboard to recovery. Now, in that time period, did you have supportive family and friends, or did they, when people don't know what to do, they don't know what to say, they often avoid. It's not their fault.
For sure,
They just don't know what to do.
I had really supportive family. I was lucky, and coworkers. They were very good to me.
Good.
I was fortunate in that sense, but when I went away to rehab or rehabilitation hospital in Homewood in Guelph, support sort of dwindled a little bit, and I kind of felt very alone. But luckily, I found a lot of comfort in peer support while I was there.
Yes.
So we didn't have peer support teams prior to this. We didn't we didn't talk about that. And at Homewood, they had excuse me, a uniformed professionals group that all people in our culture would get together and meet, and we would talk about emotions and feelings, and not so much about the trauma necessarily, but that was the first time in my life that I felt I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by people who understood my story and could feel the emotions I was talking about. So even though some support on the outside kind of dwindled a bit, I found a new tribe, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
A new family, and I was so fortunate to be able to participate in that, for sure. Yeah.
I think something that's very key there as well is, and a huge part of my message is that we do not always need a professional, and we will not always have a professional available. In fact, like Pallium Canada shares that we will have professionals available to us about 10% of the time. So when you go to rehabilitation and you have your counselors and everything, and that's very necessary and wonderful.
Yes.
But that peer support, they're not in there as counselors, and they don't have to have a PhD.
Right.
They're saying, I've been through this awful stuff also.
Yes.
And sharing in that, and I think that is so valuable, isn't it?
It is. It was everything to me. Being able to break down my wall of stigma that I had wrapped around myself. It didn't matter what degree I had on the wall, and I was still a human being, and I needed to come to terms with I needed help and accept help like my peers were accepting. And that took a long time, but that was probably one of the most powerful resources I had. So I was really happy when I left Homewood. There wasn't anything really like that available to me with my peers, so I put a call out onto social media and was hoping to start a peer support group like that. And we had, I think, 10 or 12 people across Canada come forward who were either firefighters, police officers. We had I think we had a nurse, we had a doctor, we had anyone in that field basically came forward. And we developed a peer support group called Wings of Change.
I love it.
Yeah, and now Chris Piva actually runs 3 of them, and it's amazing.
You're awesome, Chris.
Yeah, you are, Chris. So awesome. Yeah. And it's all completely free. It's just a model that I kind of took from Homewood's idea, my 12 steps that I go to those meetings a little bit, and under the wonderful experience of Sid Gravel, who's a retired staff sergeant in Ottawa.
Sid from Badge of Life.
So he helped me a lot, and we used his book for some of the readings.
Yes, his book is called
56 Seconds.
Yes, okay.
And so he guided us and basically said you don't need to reinvent the wheel. He was a peer support expert, and so he still helps us when we need it.
I love it.
But we have, I think, close to 30 chapters across Canada
Isn't
now.
that extraordinary? Do you see, so from your traumatic experience, you created something so incredible, and I love that ties in so well with what you posted on Facebook. Your wound is probably not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility, and healing through peer support and helping others.
Right.
It's so powerful, isn't it?
Yes.
Anybody out there that's suffering?
Yes.
Reach out to people who have been through similar journeys, and with no shame, right? Like,
that's right.
We've all had our life is messy.
We all have a story.
We all have a story.
That's
incredible.
Right.
So the most helpful thing so far in your journey has been the peer support and creating these. You've done so much more, though, Natalie, because you have a couple of books you've written as well.
I do. So, yeah, I have a couple of them here. My Save My Life School is basically a memoir about my journey through recovery. It starts with my first blog that I wrote in 2014 and shared with the world that I was battling with mental illness.
Yes.
And there was no turning back. I couldn't erase it, and people saw it. And I thought, oh my God, I put myself out to the wolves. What have I done?
Yeah.
And what I found was that there weren't wolves, really. There was just supportive people who wanted to hear more about my journey because they saw themselves in me as well. So it's basically everything that I went to an outpatient program at the Royal Victoria Hospital. I shared my ups and downs, dark side, you know, positive things, everything. Yep. I share my journey through Homewood, and then the last chapter is what does life look like now? What coping mechanisms do I use? What does it look like to actually be in recovery? So, and the other book is just like daily affirmations from the first book. Yes.
That is truly amazing. So may I see these?
Sure.
Because I think that everybody should have these books, and it just, isn't it incredible? I mean, we were talking about this earlier. 6 years ago, if I would have said, Natalie, you've gone through all this stuff, it's really hard, but you're going to turn your life around, you're going to go to rehab, you're going to write books and be the change. You're even going to be a counselor for the city of Barrie.
Never would I think.
You would have said, I'm sorry, you have me confused with somebody else, right? Wouldn't that be what it would be?
Absolutely.
And here you are, and it's so extraordinary. And when your children see what you've done, how do they feel about your whole journey?
They are so happy and proud, and because they've gone on the journey with me. Right? So I was really fortunate to be part of a documentary called After the Sirens of Cbc, and they interviewed my kids as well.
Amazing.
So even though they had therapy and care, and I never really had an opportunity to hear their side. Yes. And what that experience was like to have a mom that was so sick.
Sure.
And it was so heartwarming to hear they just were happy I'm well, and
Wow.
happy that I'm doing what I'm doing. And I mean, we talk about mental health like the weather in my family now.
Well, I know that's like grief, death, and dying in our
Right.
family. I know, Mom, we're going to talk about this again. But to normalize the matter of facts of life.
Yes.
And one of the matter of facts of life is that there will be many people who suffer a mental health crisis, mental health illness.
Yes.
It's not their fault.
Not at all.
It is as much a diagnosis as a fracture, any other disease process. And we, just because we can't see it, doesn't mean it's not real. But it also doesn't mean that we can't get through to the other side.
Absolutely.
And I say you never know what awaits on the other side of grief.
Exactly.
You never know.
You never know. And it's really funny that you mentioned grief as well, because I'm hoping to maybe write another book about the grieving process of your career as a first responder.
Oh, yeah.
So, and healthcare provider. I think in that culture, we think, oh, this isn't my identity, you know, I put a uniform on and I go to work, but it's, you know, I go home and I'm done. No, it's not. My personal experience and people's experience that have come to me, hundreds of people that reach out to me in the same position and say, I don't know how I won't be a doctor, a nurse, firefighter, police officer.
Oh, absolutely.
I literally went through the grieving process, every step along the way, until I reached acceptance.
That is such a huge, I mean, grief is, that's what I talk about all the time. But the thing that people don't understand is even in life's transitions, even if it's a positive change, you still have to grieve your old life. I remember my last, when somebody said, so it looks like I was casual at the hospital, it looks like you haven't done any shifts, so are you terminating your employment here? And I remember feeling this anxiety. Like,
absolutely.
I'm like, I don't know. Give me a second. And I thought, am I not ready because I'm feeling so anxious and I'm crying and what's wrong? I was grieving, of course.
We're grieving.
It's just like with any transition. I said, you have a baby, you grieve freedom and sleep.
That's true.
It doesn't mean you're not happy or that it's the wrong move. And I think that's so critical. You have to grieve your career, right? In any of life's transitions, you grieve your old life. But that doesn't mean that you can't create a new wonderful life that you didn't anticipate. Yes. So what is your life like now? What?
Wow. Life is great now.
Yes.
So yeah, the grieving process of my career as a paramedic, and eventually I had to say to my psychologist, she asked me straight out, will you ever be on the road as a paramedic again?
Yes.
And saying the words, I won't be a paramedic anymore, I just bawled my eyes out.
Absolutely.
And it was years after my diagnosis of PTSD. But I really, and I felt a hole in my heart, like, well, how am I supposed to help my community properly? And that's where running for city council came into play. And my family really supported me and encouraged me, and I thought that's a great idea. I had a little bit of experience with legislation for PTSD, and so I had a taste of politics a little bit, but...
And you still wanted to go
And
today.
I still wanted to go. I was fortunate. It was a great experience, actually.
Yes, good for you.
And yeah, I know, I'm very blessed, but I had no expectations of whether or not I would be successful. I started campaigning, and I did that for months and months, and knocked on all the doors in my ward, and I was successful. I was chosen. So it's a new journey.
Yes, that is so wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and back to your experience. So you were instrumental in Bill 163?
Bill 163.
And so what is Bill 163?
So it's presumptive legislation is what they call it.
Okay.
So basically, if a first responder, corrections officer, dispatcher, or military member is ever diagnosed with PTSD, it's presumed that their PTSD came from their work.
Okay.
So that makes it so Workplace Safety Insurance Board, WSIB, will cover that injury.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes, yes.
Yeah, before it was, battling, trying to figure out, oh, was it this call, this call?
Oh, right.
And
where did it come from? Where did it start?
Where did it start? And it's cumulative a lot of times.
Of
so
course.
we can't really pinpoint it, really. So it's helped a lot of people to not have to wait for coverage from WSIB and lose their house, lose their family, lose so much because they weren't
when they've already lost enough. Right?
Exactly.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that's that was that legislation, and it was passed unanimously. It's nonpartisan, and it was really, it's helped a lot of people since then.
Extraordinary. And there's a bill across Canada.
Yes, Bill
and
C-211.
That's C-211,
yes.
and that is also the same legislation, basically.
It's a bit different. This one is more of a framework legislation. So this is by Todd Doherty, an MP out in Caribou, Prince George, and it's focused on doing evidence-based research that will lead us to answers. How would we treat PTSD properly from coast to coast across Canada, and looking to provide that care equally across Canada as well. So it was passed, and we're hopefully going to be forming committees soon to get the ball rolling and actually do the work that we need to make the legislation effective.
Amazing.
And it's, yeah, but it's great.
So I sense a partnership coming up, because you see, you're treating PTSD and removing the stigma, and my whole goal is prevention, prevention, teaching everyone how to just show up, right? Because I remember, and I've been in the situation, you see somebody crying or upset, ooh, let's walk away. They probably want to be alone.
Right.
It's like, no, you know, maybe they just need someone to just show up for them.
Love that.
And just sit there and just say, I'm here for you.
Oh,
I don't know what to do or say,
oh my God, it's
but
so true.
I'm here.
Yes.
You don't need a PhD to care.
Right. That's
Just
so brilliant.
show up.
Yes.
It's pretty simple, but we make it complicated, and we feel like we're not qualified.
Right.
Oh, I don't know enough about mental health issues or whatever. It's like, no. It's not your job to fix it.
Right.
How about just showing up and sitting there and saying, I don't know, I don't know what to do, but I'm here.
So true.
I'm going to sit in the mud with you.
Yeah.
And it's awful.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
Right. That's right.
Right?
Yes.
Let's just say, let's call it what it is. This is hard.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And so in the last few minutes, I know, because I know we're going to run out of time, and I'm going to say, oh no, I didn't ask her to say this. So 3 things. If you had to give just a little nugget to people who thought maybe they were struggling, maybe had symptoms of PTSD, mental health issues, what would you say to them, if in just a something to...
And short, sweet?
Yes.
Definitely to talk.
Talk
That's
about
the
it.
first one. You know, I think when I started talking and telling my story, my stigma fell away from me, and that was really what was making me sick, was feeling ashamed and you know, like I was weak.
Yes.
But talking and opening up to other people is really what makes you get better. And I also say to other people on the other side of the table exactly what you say. You don't need to have the answers. You just need to validate their feelings. Be able to listen and accept them and give them a safe place to be able to feel is really, really important. And peer support is the next best thing too that I really encourage everyone, you know, to and that comes in all different shapes and sizes. Peer support looks like a lot of different things.
Yes.
But it's making it so you're not alone. You know,
you're not alone.
You know
That's the biggest thing,
you're
people.
Not alone. Yes.
Be the one who cares. You're not alone, right?
Yes.
And I think because my second question was going to be, what about for the people surrounding that person? If you see something, say something.
Right.
If you have a concern, tell someone.
Right.
People say, oh, it's really none of my business. I'm never going to, it's my business.
Right.
If someone's suffering in silence and isolation, tell somebody.
Right, exactly.
If you're too uncomfortable to talk to them about it, go tell your boss, tell somebody.
Yeah.
If you see something, say something.
I love that.
Right?
That's so true.
Just like, let's acknowledge and allow all feelings. And if you see something, say something. And here's a big can of worms, and we don't have lots of time, but to employers. Right? To be that supportive. I think there should be a peer support group everywhere.
Right, absolutely.
Every healthcare professional, every lawyer, every teacher, we all need peer support.
That's right, that's right. I've even told WSIB workers, I sat down once with the vice president of WSIB, and I said, I really think it's important that your workers have something like Wings of Change, because they're listening to traumatic stories all the time. And so peer support's good for anyone, anywhere.
That's so important, and that's the thing, like I said, even your dentist. a doctor, whoever it is, the eye doctor. I was speaking to my eye doctor yesterday, and I said, you know, you have people coming in and they're losing their vision.
Right.
That's huge grief. You have people coming in and you're saying, hi, Mrs. Jones, how are you? Well, my son's an addict, or my husband died. Like, there's grief everywhere. Let's have peer support groups everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
We need to make this happen.
I know.
Like, I think that you and I should be going on the road together.
All right, absolutely.
This is so extraordinary, and I absolutely applaud you for, say, anyone who can take their traumatic injury journey, whatever they've been through, unapologetically share their story, because it isn't about shame, it's about, this is my story.
Right, that's right.
And we all have our messy story.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And a really cool thing, while I'm thinking of it, is there's another book that I'm a part of. It's called Brainstorm Mental Health Revolution, and there's 40 different authors that share their stories from all over the world.
Amazing.
So, and it's not about trauma. It's not a book about trauma. It's about hope and recovery and love, basically. And we have people like Michael Landsberg's stories in there, Deb McGrath, who is the wife of Colin Mockery, Stefan Grenier, who's huge in the PTSD world and advocacy. But it's little snippets of stories, and we thought, okay, this is great. We being the publisher, who's my best friend now.
Oh, perfect,
and,
yes.
And we thought, okay, this is great. We're going to put this book out, and people will read it, and they'll, you know, find hope in the stories. But what we also found was it was so overwhelmingly profound that the people who wrote their stories were recovering because they got a chance to tell their story.
And that it's in there. Telling your story is so important, and we are going to share that cover. And I told you we would run out of time because I think we could talk all day.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I think this is the beginning of a wonderful friendship.
I think so.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and for everything that you do for people.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this has been Real Life Talks. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a show about learning how to just show up for yourself and others and to be empowered and resilient. So if you want to be able to show up for others, my call to action is always plan your life, plan your death, and then just love your life to death. And always bring your own tambourine to the party.